Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Do you have a strong-willed child? Were you ever a strong-willed child and you're now a strong-willed adult? How do you define strong-willed? A strong-willed child typically refers to a child who possesses a determined and independent nature, often displaying a high degree of self-confidence, persistence, and a strong sense of their own preferences and opinions. So why is it that parenting these children is often the most difficult, even though they're often a chip off the old block, so to speak? Wouldn't you think that if we understood, if we'd been this way ourselves, that we could actually do it better? Well, no, not always. And in fact, the more similar you are to your child, sometimes the more heated the battles. Now, what if your child was opposite to you? Possibly even trickier. While the strong-willed child's determined and independent thinking can foster resilience and leadership skills, it can also lead to conflicts, power struggles, and difficulties in following rules. Effective parenting strategies for strong-willed children often involve finding a balance between allowing them to express their autonomy while setting appropriate boundaries and providing guidance. It's also important to recognise that each child's unique, and these characteristics may vary in intensity and expression from one individual to another. I'm Kate Mason. Welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Sonali Vongchusiri is the founder of Forward Together Parenting and the Raising Your Strong-Willed Child series. She often says that she was that kid and now she has 3 of her own, just like her. Highly sensitive parents of strong-willed kids come to Sonali to understand the needs at the root of the unrest that they feel, both their child's and their own needs. Sonali helps parents unlock parenting from heart to mind to be the parent they want to be, to establish boundaries of safety and belonging while confidently leading with love within their family, even when things get tough. Sonali finds children wise, attuned and present. She finds parents wise, attuned and present. Sonali lives in Bangkok and she's originally from the US and is of Indian origin. She has albinism, which means she has no pigment in her skin, hair or eyes. And while this is a podcast and you might not even know what she looks like, it does have an impact. Sonali feels that she sees people in ways that they don't see themselves. And she's proof that it's possible to repair just about any break in a relationship with your child. Hi Sonali, welcome to the show. It's great to have you join us today.
Hi Kate, thank you so much for having me here. It's good to be here.
Now I'm going to jump right in and I want to ask you about your childhood journey and how you came to work from your experiences with the work that you're currently doing today as a parenting coach. So let's start at the very beginning.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So what I like to say is that I was that kid and I have those kids, meaning that I show up differently in the world. I have albinism, which means I don't have pigment in my skin, hair, and eyes, and I'm legally blind. And so I was that kid. I get your kid. And then I have those kids. My kids show up differently in the world. We're sensitive and strong-willed all over the place. And so I get you, the parent. And what my experiences as a kid taught me is that, and my experiencing in parenting, at the beginning of our parenting journey, I was that type of sensitive, strong-willed where I tried to people please. So I would shut down. I would not use my voice. I would try to, if everybody else was okay, then I thought I'd be okay. So I was putting other people's needs over mine. And I was constantly like, if I do it this way, then I'll be okay. And then I had these kids that knew what they wanted when they wanted. And they would not do things other people's way.
Right.
And at the beginning of our relationship, it was this conflict. And it wasn't until I stopped telling myself I needed to parent somebody else's way and look at what it is that I needed that things started to shift for me. And so now that's the message that I support parents in seeing, is that to let go of you need to do X, Y, Z to be a good parent, and to start asking themselves, what is it that we need? One of the things that I believe is that we all have the same set of core needs. It's just that some of us have non-traditional ways of getting those needs met. And oftentimes what we label as that strong-willed child is a child where they may need to do things differently. And we may need to do things differently to be in relationship with them. And so it's us figuring out together what it is that we need as a family system.
So as a young child, were you strong-willed or sensitive or both? And how did your strong will, which obviously you have, how did that show up in your childhood coming through?
Okay. So I'll pull back for a minute. What I say is I support highly sensitive parents of strong-willed kids, which is really, Kate, highly sensitive, strong-willed parents of highly sensitive,
Right.
strong-willed kids.
Yep.
People don't want to hear that, which is really parents who feel different, who have kids who feel different.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a kid, I was really shut down. I did the things everybody else did. And like I would go outside and play for hours. I would go to the beach. I would do all those things. But internally, my experience was dysregulation. I felt jittery. I didn't know why I didn't like certain things that other people liked. And I internalized that, oh, that must mean something about me. Let me just go and do that thing to be okay. So my sensitivity, strong will, came into play with like really digging in and shutting myself down so that I could do the thing.
Right. So,
And and it wasn't until I got to parenting where I realized that I couldn't do that anymore, because I wasn't able. So I was doing it other people's way. And it was when I got into parenting where it's like, when I tried to do this other people's way, when I tried to go and spend all day in Bangkok in the heat at the park, which I thought was what a good parent did, I couldn't understand why I got home and I just wanted to close all the curtains and wipe out and take a nap for a couple hours. And I was like, oh, when I realized, I was like, instead of telling myself, you need to do it this way, that, oh, what is it that I need? And, oh, maybe I need to parent in a different way than what is the traditional way. And that's an okay thing. In fact, that's where my kids and I can connect. So it's like that.
yes.
That idea of like, I didn't need to do it perfectly, which is the you need to do it this way, to I could parent with my own personality, bringing in who I am into the relationship. And actually, I see that's what strong-willed parents and kids actually want is we oftentimes feel this conflict internally because we care deeply about attuning to ourselves and we care deeply about attuning to other people. And so we have both those needs. And so my strong will I used to attune to other people and dismiss that need to attune to myself. Then I had kids that had that strong will but used it to attune to themselves, but they dismissed their needs to attune to other people. But actually, when you bring them both together, that's when you can see meltdowns, frustration, all those things melt away. Because one of the things that I hear parents say a lot is, oh my gosh, I didn't know how considerate, how caring, how generous my child is. They're so sensitive. They just needed to feel safe enough to be able to communicate that and express that. And that's been my experience as well.
That is huge. So really, parenting taught you a huge amount of stuff because you actually finally realized that what you were hiding all this time and that you actually needed to be yourself through this kind of journey in that sense. So with your kids, with them being strong-willed, and you suddenly realize that it's about you as well. It's not just about them and that you need to be thinking of yourself as well as other people in the whole place of things. So how do you then bring your children onto not just thinking about themselves, thinking about others and being, having that double perspective? Now, just a quick question. Were you a perfectionist or not? Are you a perfectionist or not? Or was it just ingrained? It was just something you did to yourself to want to be perfect?
It's perfectionism. And I think that
Right.
perfectionism is, and I think actually strong-willed kids have that perfectionism. So I think sensitive, strong-willed, there is a lot of perfectionism. So yes, I had a lot of perfectionism, and I still do.
Yes, you
inside
don't
of
get rid of
me.
it.
Yeah, no, I do.
Yes,
But
yes.
what it was thinking that, oh well, if I'm perfect, if I do these things a certain way, then I'll be okay. And it was really one of the things that I like to say is that love isn't perfect. Love is so much more than perfect, because it is those like moments where we show who we truly are, where we can deeply connect. And so I have a story with my daughter, if I could share that.
Yes, go for it. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so I call this one stuffed animal balloons. And this was when she was trying to be perfect, because my highly sensitive, strong-willed kids also want to be perfect. And so it was Mother's Day. And one of our family traditions when we celebrate birthdays is that we wake the birthday person up by throwing balloons on them. And so she had gotten it into her heart that she wanted to wake me up by throwing balloons onto me. Well, the night before Mother's Day, she's looking around and she's like, I need balloons. And I looked in my home and we didn't have any balloons. So I told her, oh, sweetie, we don't have any balloons. And she just started crying and screaming that, no, I need balloons. I need balloons. I need balloons. It will be ruined. Everything will be ruined. And she had a meltdown. And it lasted about an hour because she really wanted balloons. For her, that was the perfect.
Yes.
She's like, no, Mother's Day will not be perfect if we don't have the balloons. And I had told her, I'm like, oh, I'd worked with her in that moment. I was like, you want balloons because you want me to know how much I love you. That's you showing how much you love me and you care for me. And it's really important to you to communicate that. So I connected her melting down about the balloons to how deep her love was for me. And she continued to cry and sob, and then she finally settled, and she's like, okay, it just won't. And as a strong-willed child, she said all the things. Well, then we just won't celebrate Mother's Day then if you won't go out and get balloons. And well, then I'm not doing anything, and then I'm not making a card. And she did all those things, and she's like, I want you to go out and get them. And I didn't want to go out that evening to go get balloons. It was already late, and it was bedtime, and so she went to bed. She'd settled down a bit, and she's like, okay, it just won't be that way. It's not going to be that way. In the morning time, when I woke up, she had crept into my room. She'd taken all of her she has these small stuffed animals, like those Beanie Babies.
Yeah.
She'd collected all of them in her arms, and she started to throw them on top of me. And that was her solution. That was what she came up with. And she had thrown them all on me, and I had told her, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's how, like, that I could feel her love for me, that she was so committed. She'd found a solution for how she could shower me with love, the way that she felt showered with love when I throw balloons on her on her birthday. And that to me is that whole love isn't perfect. It's so much more. It's having stuffed animal balloons thrown on you in the morning on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
It's, it's the meltdown that comes when you've got ice cream soup and then the giggles. And it's a lot, right? It's all of those things. So instead of perfection being the bar, love goes beyond that perfection.
That's a really great thought, and what a beautiful thing for her. And the thing about, as a perfectionist, working out that actually you could do something that was equally as good and brought about equally the same feelings is really good for somebody like that. Being the non-perfectionist myself, sitting over here, because I didn't know about perfection, and I still don't do it. But I do know people that are, and I often wonder how to handle those people too, and to handle children like that, because I don't know what to do with somebody who comes to me with the expectations that they need to be perfect and that they have a meltdown when it doesn't work out their way. Just a quick question, how do you go into that? So you went into it with with acknowledging their feelings of how they wanted it to be perfect. That's right, isn't it? And then when that's still melting down because it's not quite right and it's never going to be the same again, everything. Do you feel that once you've assured them, you're loved and that that it was going to be a gesture of love, whatever they were going to do they normally settle into that? Because my kids aren't like your kids, I don't think, in that sense. So is that something that you recommend people do if they feel they have this kind of child?
What I've seen work is this connection between action and heart and mind and heart. So I think when we're focused on our kids are trying to be perfect or we're trying to be perfect, we're saying the action is what shows our love. And the action is what shows our heart. And so what I like to do is take whatever action, whatever's happening in your world, and connect that to your core, to your values, to your needs, to your emotions. So there was a case where I had forgotten a good friend's birthday, and I had forgotten it not by a day, but by a month. I'd completely missed it, been around that friend on that time, and she didn't say anything to me. And when I realized it, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much guilt. And how I'd worked with myself is I had said, oh, the reason I feel guilt is because I care so much about expressing my appreciation of this friend, how much I treasure them. And I was worried that by having forgotten that birthday, that I wasn't expressing that. So I connected the guilt that I was feeling to my value of being considerate, of expressing how I treasured this friend. And so that is what made the guilt safe enough to feel. There's another example. It's actually from a parent I support, and it's her Mother's Day story where she's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how much changed when I did this, when I connected what actually happens to values. And so her kids had forgotten Mother's Day. And this was this past Mother's Day.
Yep.
And she was like, oh, she had felt this conflict internally. Remember how I mentioned like there's this conflict internally that we feel. So she was like, oh, on one part of me gets it because I saw how busy we were this past week. Of course, it's something that just slipped. And she's like, oh, but the other part of me, and she's doing this with herself first. She's like, the other part of me is sad only because I love the way that we celebrate holidays together, and I really value the way that we celebrate together as a family. And so if we think about what we would normally do in that situation, is you might say, oh, I understand, so I'm not going to say anything, right? And we shut ourselves down.
Yeah.
We shut ourselves down. Or we would say something, be like, hey, you forgot Mother's Day, right?
Yes.
And
Make
this
them
is
feel
that,
guilty.
like,
Yep.
that, right? And that doesn't feel good
No.
either. And so what she did is she brought these two parts of her together. And I'll sometimes talk about them as our louder parts and our quieter parts. And so she started with that part of her that did understand. She's like, hey, look, I've been here this past week. We've had so much going on. I think it was the end of the school year. So we've had, end of year things, and we've had all these different things going on. Of course, it has been really busy. Of course, there are things that get missed. And so she first met them there, and she's like, and of course, there's a part of me that does feel sad. And that's only because I really value the way we celebrate holidays together. And I know we all value that. I know you value that too. And she had said, as she said that, she felt that wave of relief wash over her body, and she could feel her kids literally soften with the acknowledgement that they weren't being guilted, they weren't being shamed. In fact, she'd taken her experience of sad and she'd made it safe to communicate because she'd also communicated, she connected it to the heart that they all valued. Not just her valued how they celebrated, but she knows they valued that. So she held herself in goodness and she held her kids in goodness. And she had said it was the first time, without them feeling guilt or without them feeling shamed. She's like, they were like, looked at her and they were like, oh, yeah, we do value how we celebrate holidays together. And they had gone and made a card, and even though the day didn't start off perfectly, right? It didn't start off perfectly, but they had such a great day together because of that open, honest, authentic acknowledgement. She's like, that honestly, that that was the embodiment of love isn't perfect. It's so much more because they connected so deeply together.
Yeah, that's a great example. So when you talk about, your needs and your child's needs together, that's what you're talking about. So is our louder part the part where we go, oh, I can't believe nobody remembered me, or is that our quieter part? Or is it which part do you call the quieter and the louder? The one that's reconciling, hey, listen, this is okay, we've been really busy this week. Or the sad part, the one where you go, oh, they forgot. I can't believe they forgot. So which one's quiet and which one's loud?
It depends on how we would normally show up, right? So if we would normally be like, you forgot, I can't believe you forgot. Yeah. That's our louder part. Does that make sense? If we'd be like, I'm sad, you forgot, then that's our louder part. Then our quieter part is the, oh, I understand.
Mm. And you say that in your head to start with, do you? This is something that's going on in the parent's head. You're not actually verbalizing it to the child until you've thought about it.
Right.
And do you always verbalize that, or do you keep it?
We can keep it to ourselves. Sometimes even the internal acknowledgement is all we need. Does that make sense? And oftentimes that's all we need is that internal acknowledgement of, oh, I want to do these two things. And that brings enough for us to say, it brings the approval of all parts within us. And that's all that we need. And even like and so sometimes we might do that. Sometimes we might communicate it to our kids. So, and I find that it helps out because I find that parents and kids oftentimes hold opposite positions with louder and quieter parts. So, in that example, she might have held the part of, you forgot, and they might have held the part of, hey, we were really busy, right? Or sometimes, here's an example where it's one of those where a parent would need to say something, like the child is going to bed and they're asking, you might know this, Kate, like for the 11th hug, can I have one more hug? Can I have one more hug? And it's the 11th or the 12th or the 57th hug that they're asking for. And the parent is like, oh my gosh, I feel this conflict inside because I want my child to know that I love them. I want to keep hugging them and letting them feel that. And at the same time, I want them to go to bed. Because I want them to have go to sleep. And I want them to have a good day tomorrow. I want myself to get some rest. So in that moment, our louder part is the go to bed part, right? Go to bed. Our quieter part,
absolutely,
as the parent, is the I do love hugs with them, right? But it's a pretty quiet part at that by the 11th, 12th, 57th ask.
Yeah, by the 11th. Yep, that's right. Yep. And the other one's getting much louder.
Right.
Go to bed.
Right. The go to bed part for us is our louder part. For our kids, in that moment, it's flipped. Their louder part is the, I want one more hug. I want one more. I think the one more hug is going to be the thing that's going to solve this time, right? What they're actually seeking with the one more hug is a felt sense of connection. So that's their louder part. Their quieter part is they probably are tired. Deep down somewhere inside, there is a whisper voice saying, I think I'm tired, right? So that's their quieter part. So what we do in that moment, it's one of those where we need to communicate something to them, right? So we would we'd acknowledge in us, of course, I want to say go to bed, but we wouldn't start there. We would actually start meeting our kids in their louder part, so our quieter part, and then we would bring them to our louder part. So you'd say, oh my gosh, hugging you feels so good. I want to keep hugging you and hugging you and hugging you all night long. And I also want to let your body rest so that you can have a great day at school tomorrow. So I went to the louder part in the child and then the quieter part, our louder part. Let's do this. Let's do one big squishy hug where you put those 2 arms around me and I put my 2 arms around you. And then let's say goodnight so we can have a great day tomorrow. And so that's how, when there are, we can use the louder and quieter parts to support us in being able to then flip it and communicate with our child. Oh, I want, and I call that an I care statement. Oh, I want to do this, and I also want to do this.
Yes. Yeah. So you can bring it back to actually caring about them. And like you say, that tiny voice they have there must be saying, I'm feeling a little bit tired by now. So that's a great way of pulling in the love with a boundary. You've got, how do you distinguish between a limit and a boundary? Now, I just want to say that I was listening to a podcast that had you on, and when you were talking about the hug and the need for a hug, and the person you were talking to said it's kind of like when you're in a relationship and one person needs something more than the other. And unless you feel that need, they want and what, it becomes overwhelming. They just keep wanting. But once you feel the need that they have, they're satisfied. So that one, yes, let's just have the one more big squishy hug, satisfies that with the knowledge that they are going to bed. This is the final thing. And I think that that's very true. I think if you fill in the need for them, often they're satisfied, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually does meet the need, because the need was a felt sense of connection. Right. But if we keep going and give a 12th hug and a 13th hug,
yes.
You probably know this, Kate, when you're giving that hug, there's we're like, okay, here's the hug. But we're
that's
not
right. It's a bit of resentment behind there.
Right. So the
right.
boundary actually, in us knowing it's the last hug and them knowing that it's the last hug, allows us to tap into the felt sense of connection in that moment, where we drink in that hug and they drink in the hug, instead of it needing to be more and more and more and more. So limits and boundaries, you asked that. I define a limit and I distinguish them simply because I think it helps to allow us to notice where we are. I say a limit is an excuse to disconnect, and boundaries give us permissions to love. So in that example, having that boundary, knowing it was the last hug, allowed us to really drink in that hug with our kid, right? And then that was what our child was actually seeking, was that to feel us, to feel connected to us as they separate, as they go to sleep. And actually, we want that too. So oftentimes when we set a limit and say, nope, that's it tonight, see you in the morning, it doesn't feel good to us. It feels disconnecting to us too. And it empties us in a way. It leaves us feeling empty and unfulfilled. But by doing this, the boundaries give us permissions to love. So we feel connected. They feel connected. We feel really solid about saying goodnight. We feel secure in that. And they feel that too. So valid, very true. And I think we parents often get caught up in that we give in and give in and give in without that. It's great to know that you can put a boundary in and they feel loved and connected at the same time, because, we often struggle with the fact that we have got those harsh rejecting boundaries, and we really don't ever want to break a child's self-esteem. So how can they be used to build self-esteem for a child? Okay. Yes. And I love this question. So that goes back to connecting whatever has happened, whatever is happening in that moment, to their core, to their values, to their needs, to their emotions. So when we do that, it actually supports a child in understanding who they are unconditionally. And here's another story with my daughter related to that. So sometimes when a child doesn't listen, they're being disrespectful. And then we might say to them, that's disrespectful. What that does when we say something like that is that actually kind of chips away at their core a bit. They're like, am I disrespectful? I don't want to be disrespectful. I must need to do this a different way. Right? And so what I like to do is I like to say, connect that action, whatever's happening, to the need. So a story that I like to share, it's called M&M Respect. And it's where my daughter, we'd gotten home from Taekwondo one day and she'd eaten half a packet of M&Ms while she was out. And she got home, we'd brushed teeth, we had done all the things. And then as we're getting ready for bed, she says, can I eat my M&Ms? And I'm like, sweetie, of course I want to say yes, because I know how much you love them. And I need to say no because it's bedtime, we've brushed. Why don't we do this? We'll put it in the fridge, and because that's what we need to do with our chocolate in Bangkok. And we'll have it in the morning.
Right,
and
yes.
We'll have it the next day. And she looks at me, and you see her in that quote unquote strong-willed way kind of harden. And she puts her hand in her packet of M&Ms, takes a handful, looks at me, and puts them in her mouth, right? So the thought that parents think in that moment is, that's disrespectful. Right, Kate?
Yep, very much. Yes, you're not doing as I asked.
Very much, right? And so take that thought and flip it. That she's respectful. That's unconditional. So then what I said to her, so I took that and I flipped it. I said, I feel disrespected. Well, I flip it and I say, I know that she respects me. So I said, sweetie, you ate those M&Ms and I know you do respect me. So I know there must be something going on here. And she's strong-willed, right? So she looked at me and she put her hand in one more time and stuck a couple more M&Ms in her mouth.
Yep.
Right. And I said it, and so and what it was is, it's, think of it like they're not testing us. They're checking how stable, how secure can we hold their core, that she is respectful. So I said again, oh, sweetie, you did just eat those M&Ms, and I know you do respect me. And I'm like, yeah, that happened. And you do respect, and we have respect between us. And then she cried,
Right.
and she had shared that something had, it came out, and it doesn't always come out what happened, but something hard had happened that day earlier. So it was really, so I don't see it as a child testing. I see it as a child checking how solid, how secure can you hold who I am, and connect to my values, my emotions, whatever I'm experiencing, and know who I am. And that to me is allowing our child to like get that sense of identity of who they are. And that is self-esteem. So that internalized sense of no matter what happens, I know who I are. Oh, and that you know who they are. I know you do care. Or, oh, you forgot, like we forgot Mother's Day. We all did. And I know we all care about how we celebrate. We all love to celebrate together because we treasure each other. So holding those values, that core of who they are unconditionally.
And often if someone asks for the best from you, then you do deliver that. And words like disrespectful and lazy and words like that do rip to the core. You know, I think that's a great way of switching it around, really. So really just switch it around and look for the best in them. You know, I've got to admit, I always say to my kids, I'm a great mum. I just want you to know that. And I've done the very best I can for you. If you've got any complaints, you might have to see a psychologist. But in all honesty, I do think, and I tell my children that I really do, and they love it. They say, oh, yeah, no, we get it, you know, and they're great kids in that sense, you know, because I think we all need to value ourselves and get other people to respect us.
When we do what you said, Kate, like we say, oh, I am a good mom, and, you know, I've done some things that I'm sure you want to see a psychologist about at some point. What it does, though, is it keeps it safe for our kids because they're like, oh, my mom has had some things happen. Things haven't gone perfectly, and she still knows who she is. Does that make sense? And so you're connecting whatever's happened to your core. And when they see you being able to hold yourself in that way, they're like, oh, it's safe for me to do that for myself, too. Like I can, whatever I do, I know who I am. So I had forgotten, like one of the things that I've worked through is I had a lot of teasing and bullying as a kid, as someone with a disability. And something happened the day where somebody was teasing my middle son, and it was in front of me, and I froze and I didn't say anything. And that was my body response. And later I went to him in front of his siblings, and I was like, look, that happened. I did freeze, and that wasn't okay. It's my job to say something because it's my job to keep you safe. And that's really important to me. And so I acknowledged that. And I said, so here's what I'm going to do next time. But by doing that, I made it safe that thing happened. I didn't just pretend like it didn't happen. I acknowledged, you know what? I had a whoops. Something didn't go how I wanted it. And I connected it to my core of, you know, it's really important to me advocating for you and making sure that you're safe, and and speaking up when something isn't okay is important to me. And I hadn't done that in that moment. And that I felt his body relax. He's like, yeah. And then and his brother was like, yeah, that, you know, like I had felt uncomfortable too. And then something like that happened with him. It was a couple days later where somebody had said something to his sister, and he kind of shut down. And he's like, it happened to me too, Mom. I shut down. I wanted to say something and I didn't know how. And I'm like, oh, I get that. Remember a couple of weeks ago when that happened to me? and he could say that in front of his sister. So it kept their relationship safe between siblings as well, because they were like, because he didn't do it perfectly. His intention was there. He had just shut down as well. So
and that's a really great way to, like you say, to acknowledge a mistake or something that you did mean to say, and it makes the other person identify with that themselves when they're moving forward. So what Can you just give me a couple of thoughts for the parents out there as we wind up who want to be perfect, and how, just a couple of your top tips on how not to worry about being perfect?
That's a really interesting question. And part of me wants to answer it directly as you said it. And I'm going to actually answer it differently.
Okay.
So instead of how to not worry about not being perfect, what I would do is I would say you're worrying about being perfect because you care so much about expressing your love to your child. So I'm actually going to take the feeling that they're feeling and connect it to their core. And so that we're not, so instead of saying, don't worry, because a lot of times for those of us that are highly sensitive and perfectionist, when we start to worry, then we judge ourselves for worrying. And now we're in a cycle of judgment and worry and judgment and worry. So instead of not worrying, think of every emotion as one of your children. And how would you greet your child when they walk into a room? We'd be like, oh, there you are. So you can say to yourself when you start to worry, oh, there you are, worry. Of course I'm worried. That's because I care so much about expressing my love to my kids, to them. I care so much about them succeeding. I care so much about them having a healthy sense of self-esteem and who they are.
That is beautiful.
And yeah.
What a lovely way to end it, because that gives me great insight into what to say to somebody like that. That's really great. Thank you. Now, Sonali, let's talk about your free summit coming up at the end of this month. If you can just have a quick chat about how that works for you and when it is, and how people contact you, perhaps if they miss out on that. Floor's yours.
Absolutely. So the summit is called Raising Your Strong-Willed Child. We're in season 5. And the intent is to support parents who may feel defeat, despair, exhaustion, overwhelm, confusion, frustration in their relationship with their child. They've tried different things and they don't know what to do. And so I've brought together speakers, including you, Kate, specifically to talk about parenting, what we're experiencing, and also parenting approaches for highly sensitive, strong-willed kids. Because these kids do need something different. We oftentimes don't know what it is. So the series is meant to support parents, give them strategies for their kids, and allow them to recognize through each conversation that they are capable, that you are capable, that it is possible to shift the dynamic that you're experiencing right now, and that there are others who understand where you are. Oftentimes speakers, when I talk to them, they're like, oh my gosh, I have a strong-willed kid, or I was that kid. And so there are more of us out there than oftentimes we realize. And sometimes as a parent of a highly sensitive, strong-willed child, we look around and we say, how come that works in everybody else's home and not in mine? And so here are a community of people where we're sitting in the same spot you are, and we get you. So it goes live at the end of this month.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yep. And so your details will be in our show notes. So we'll put a link to that as well. And if people go to your website, there's something they can click on in your website, is there?
Yeah. So if you happen to be listening to this after the summit, there'll always be a next summit, so you can catch that. And summits, putting them on is something that I enjoy. It nourishes me deeply. And so you'll always be able to catch the next one. And I also have a tech resource that I call Tackling Tech Troubles, Moving from Conflict to Collaboration. And really, oftentimes what's going on with when kids dig their heels around tech. So I'm talking about like the negotiator, or the child who asks for more and more and more, or the child who really, like, when you ask them to come off, it's like they have noise canceling headphones on, or maybe they do, and they can't hear you, and what to do in those situations. And really looking at it from this perspective of what behavior do you see? What is it they're doing? And what's the underlying need? What is it you're saying or doing? You know, you're like, no, you need to get off, or you finally snap and then they get off. And what is it that you need? What is your underlying need? And then stepping into collaboration, how can you meet both needs? Because one of the things that I genuinely believe is by doing that, that's what creates stability and security and solidity in your relationship with your child, and that stable sense of connection, that unconditional connection.
And everybody needs that, and everybody needs that with tech, especially these days. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I've learned a lot today, and I hope that anyone listening has as well. And I look forward to catching up with you again sometime, Sonali. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kate, for having me.
Sometimes as parents, we all feel confused, overwhelmed, stuck with our children, no matter how strong-willed or not. However, shifting from punishing to understanding how you can meet their needs and yours will be really worthwhile. Connecting with your child's energy in a positive way so that parenting's fun again will be fun. Tap into your child's intrinsic motivation and your own. Parenting is never easy at any stage. Having the tools to empower you to help build connection, have fun, and enjoy your future with your child for who they are. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that helps others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. And if you have an idea for an episode, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and I'll see you next time.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.